I'm Gracie, 28. Right now, I'm staring at a hotel bill for $3,000 per night while my siblings are 30,000 feet in the air, probably laughing about how they pulled one over on their generous big sister. The worst part? They planned this. Every single detail. Let me backtrack and tell you how I ended up here. Alone in a European hotel suite that costs more than most people's monthly salary, holding a receipt that might as well be my family's official declaration that I'm nothing more than a walking ATM. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt taken advantage of by your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. It started 6 months ago when my parents called a family meeting about vacation plans. Now, in most families, this might mean discussing a budget or finding dates that work for everyone. In mine, it meant figuring out how much money they could squeeze out of me while making it sound like I was being included. "We think it would be wonderful if the whole family could take a trip to Europe together," Mom announced, her voice carrying that particular tone she uses when she's about to ask for something expensive. A real bonding experience for everyone. My siblings, Kimberly and Ryan, were already nodding enthusiastically. Of course they were. They weren't the ones being set up to fund this bonding experience. "That sounds amazing," I replied carefully. "What were you thinking budget-wise?" Dad cleared his throat. "Well, we thought since you're doing so well at work," translation, "since you're the only one with savings, maybe you could handle the flights. And Kimberly and Ryan could cover accommodations and activities." The way they presented it, you'd think they were offering me the deal of the century. International flights versus local expenses? Seemed fair enough, right? I mean, hotel rooms and meals couldn't possibly cost more than round-trip tickets to Europe for 3 people? Famous last words. Kimberly jumped in immediately. "Oh my God, Gracie, this is going to be so amazing. I've already started looking at hotels. There are some really gorgeous places we could stay. And I found this food tour that looks incredible," Ryan added, "plus all those museums and attractions we talked about." The enthusiasm was infectious, and honestly, I wanted to believe this could be different. That maybe, just maybe, we could have a normal family vacation where everyone contributed fairly and actually enjoyed each other's company. I should have known better. After all, this was the same family that somehow always forgot their wallets when we went out to dinner. The same parents who had mysteriously developed financial amnesia about all the times they'd borrowed money from me over the years. But hope makes you stupid sometimes. "Okay," I agreed. "Let me start looking at flights." The collective exhale of relief around the room should have been my first red flag. 3 weeks later, I had purchased 3 round-trip tickets to Amsterdam. First class because nothing says family bonding like arriving well-rested, right? The total came to just over $8,000. Not exactly pocket change, but I figured it was worth it for a once-in-a-lifetime family trip. Kimberly sent me links to the hotel she'd chosen, a boutique place in the heart of the city with stunning canal views and 5-star reviews. "It's perfect," she gushed over the phone. "And Ryan found this amazing restaurant guide. We're going to eat so well." I asked about specifics, room rates, meal budgets, activity costs, but got vague responses. "Don't worry about the details," Mom assured me. "The kids have it all figured out. Just focus on getting us there." The kids. Kimberly was 26 and Ryan was 24. Hardly children, but somehow still referred to as the kids whenever financial responsibility needed to be avoided. 2 days before departure, I received the itinerary Kimberly had created. 5 nights in Amsterdam, 3 nights in Paris, 2 nights in Rome, high-end hotels throughout, with dinner reservations at restaurants that looked like they belonged in food magazines. "This looks expensive," I mentioned during our final planning call. "Oh, we got deals on everything," Ryan said quickly. "Don't worry, we've got it covered." I wanted to believe him. I chose to believe him. We met at the airport early on a Tuesday morning, everyone buzzing with excitement. I handed out the boarding passes, and we made our way through security like any normal family heading off on vacation. During the flight, conversation flowed easily. We talked about the places we wanted to see, the foods we wanted to try, the photos we'd take. Kimberly showed me her carefully curated Instagram feed from our trip planning, complete with aesthetically pleasing flat-lay shots of guidebooks and passports. For a moment, I let myself think this was actually going to work. The hotel in Amsterdam was even more beautiful than the photos. Our rooms were spacious and elegantly appointed, with views of the historic canals that looked like something from a postcard. The nightly rate, as I'd later discover, was €1,500 each. But that first evening, as we walked along the waterways and found a cozy cafe for dinner, everything felt perfect. We laughed, we shared stories. We actually seemed to enjoy each other's company without the usual undercurrent of tension that characterized most family gatherings. "This is nice," I told Mom as we strolled back to the hotel. "I'm glad we're doing this." "Me too, sweetheart," she replied, linking her arm through mine. It's about time this family had some quality time together. If only I'd known that by quality time, she meant quality time spent spending my money. The first red flag appeared on day 2 over brunch at a canal-side restaurant that looked like it charged by the aesthetic appeal of each dish. When the check arrived, a staggering €180 for 3 people to eat eggs Benedict, both Kimberly and Ryan suddenly developed intense interest in their phones. "Oh, weird, my card's not working," Kimberly said after a moment, not even attempting to pull out her wallet. "The conversion rate must be confusing my bank's fraud protection." Ryan nodded sagely. "Same thing happened to me yesterday at that coffee shop. These European payment systems are so different." They both looked at me expectantly. Now I could have made a scene. I could have pointed out that credit cards work the same way internationally as they do at home, or that fraud protection doesn't typically kick in over breakfast expenses. But we were on vacation, in public, and I didn't want to embarrass anyone, so I paid, and made a mental note to ask them to reimburse me later. Have you ever experienced something and known it was wrong, but told yourself you were overreacting? Drop a comment if you have. I think we've all been there. This pattern repeated itself throughout the day. Museum admission. Ryan's card was acting up. Afternoon coffee and pastries. Kimberly's banking app was glitching. Dinner at a restaurant with a 3-week waiting list. Both of their cards were somehow temporarily frozen for international transactions. Each time, they promised to transfer me the money once they got their banking sorted out. Each time, I saved the receipt and made another mental note. By the end of day 2, I had spent over €600 on expenses that were supposed to be their responsibility. "Don't worry about keeping track of every little thing," Mom said when I mentioned the receipts during our goodnight call. "It's vacation. Just enjoy yourself." Easy for her to say. She wasn't watching her credit card balance climb while her siblings played dumb about basic financial literacy. Day 3 brought Paris, and with it, an escalation in both the sophistication of our activities and the creativity of my siblings' excuses. The hotel Kimberly had chosen, without consulting me about the price naturally, was a converted mansion in the Marais district. Gorgeous, historic, and charging €800 per night, per room. "Isn't it incredible?" she gushed as we checked in. "I found it through this exclusive booking site. We're so lucky they had availability." Lucky. Right. Dinner that evening was at a Michelin-starred restaurant that Ryan had somehow managed to get reservations for. The kind of place where the sommelier spent 20 minutes explaining the wine selection and each course was presented like a work of art. It was objectively an amazing experience. The food was extraordinary, the service impeccable, the atmosphere sophisticated and romantic. Under different circumstances, I might have called it one of the best meals of my life. Instead, I spent the entire evening doing mental math, calculating the mounting total while watching my siblings order wine pairings and additional courses, with the casual abandon of people who weren't planning to pay for any of it. When the final bill came, €450, Ryan didn't even pretend to reach for his wallet. "This is on me," I announced before anyone could launch into their banking difficulties routine. "You're the best, Gracie," Kimberly said, already standing to leave. "We'll totally get the next one." But there wouldn't be a next one where they paid. There would only be more elaborate excuses and more expensive bills. That night, lying in my overpriced hotel bed, I added up the receipts. In 3 days, I had spent nearly €3,000 on expenses that weren't supposed to be mine, and we still had 6 days of vacation left. Rome was where any remaining illusion of fairness completely evaporated. The hotel Ryan had booked, and by booked, I mean selected without any intention of paying for, was a converted Renaissance palazzo near the Vatican, the kind of place that charges €3,000 per night and makes you feel like visiting royalty right up until you see the bill. "I found us the most amazing food tour," Ryan announced as we settled into our rooms. "It's a bit pricey, but it covers all the best local spots and includes wine pairing." A bit pricey turned out to be €200 per person. "And I scheduled us for a private tour of the Vatican museums," Kimberly added. "VIP access, small group, personal guide, it's going to be incredible. €300 per person. Plus, I made dinner reservations at this restaurant the concierge recommended," Ryan continued. "Apparently, celebrities eat there all the time. I didn't even ask about the price." At this point, I was too afraid to know. The Vatican tour was genuinely spectacular. Our guide was knowledgeable and passionate. The art was breathtaking, and the experience of seeing the Sistine Chapel without crowds was truly once in a lifetime. But as I handed over my credit card at the end of the tour, watching the charge for €900 process, I couldn't enjoy any of it. During lunch afterward, another expensive affair that somehow landed on my bill, I tried to address the elephant in the room. "So when do you think your banking issues will be resolved?" I asked as casually as possible. Kimberly and Ryan exchanged a look that lasted just a beat too long. "Oh, you know how international banking is," Kimberly said with a dismissive wave. "My bank said it could take up to a week to sort out. But I'm keeping track of everything. We'll settle up as soon as we get home." "Same here," Ryan agreed. "My bank's fraud department is super strict about international charges. But don't worry, I've got a spreadsheet of everything." A spreadsheet. How reassuringly official. The food tour that evening was actually wonderful. We visited 6 different restaurants and learned about Roman culinary history, while sampling everything from carbonara to gelato. Under normal circumstances, it would have been the highlight of the trip. Instead, I spent the entire experience watching Ryan and Kimberly pose for Instagram photos with their wine glasses and perfectly plated food, narrating their amazing family vacation for social media while I quietly hemorrhaged money. "This is such an incredible experience," Kimberly said into her phone as she recorded a story. "I feel so grateful for family who makes adventures like this possible. Family who makes adventures possible, not my sister who's paying for everything, not Gracie who's covering expenses she wasn't supposed to cover. Just the generic, sanitized version that made her look worldly and thankful without acknowledging any actual financial reality." That night, I sat in my hotel room surrounded by receipts, doing the math I'd been avoiding. Flights, $8,000 hotels through Rome, $12,000 meals and activities, $6,500, and we still had 2 more days in Rome. I was approaching $30,000 in expenses, with only the flight costs being what I'd originally agreed to pay. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was the growing realization that this wasn't a series of unfortunate banking coincidences. This was a plan, and I was the mark. Our last morning in Rome, I woke up before dawn with the kind of clarity that only comes from finally accepting an uncomfortable truth. This had never been about family bonding or shared experiences. This had been about finding a socially acceptable way to extract maximum money from me while maintaining plausible deniability about their intentions. Every banking issue had been perfectly timed. Every temporary freeze had lasted exactly long enough to ensure I picked up their portions of the bill. Every grateful, "we'll totally get you back," had been delivered with just enough sincerity to keep me paying without causing a scene. They had played me with the expertise of con artists, and I had let them do it because I wanted to believe my own family wouldn't deliberately scam me. Around 7 a.m., I heard movement in the hallway. Kimberly and Ryan were up early, which was unusual since we'd established a pattern of leisurely morning starts throughout the trip. I checked the schedule Kimberly had created. Our flight wasn't until evening, and we had planned to spend the day doing some final sightseeing and shopping, but something felt off. I got dressed quickly and knocked on Kimberly's door. No answer. Ryan's door was the same, silent. A growing sense of unease settled in my stomach as I took the elevator down to the lobby. The concierge, an elegant woman named Lucia, who had been incredibly helpful throughout our stay, greeted me with a puzzled expression. "Buongiorno, signora. Your family members checked out about an hour ago. They mentioned their flight was earlier than originally scheduled." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Checked out?" I managed to ask. "See, they changed their reservations through the airline app, I believe. Very efficient. They left this for you." She handed me an envelope with my name written in Kimberly's careful handwriting. Inside was a note that was almost worse than no explanation at all. "Gracie, had to catch an earlier flight, last-minute schedule change. Thanks for everything, you're the best sister ever. We'll sort out all the money stuff when we get home. Love you. K and R." I stood in the marble lobby of a hotel that cost more per night than most people's rent, holding a note that managed to be both breathlessly casual and utterly devastating. They had left. Just left. Without saying goodbye, without settling any expenses, without even the basic courtesy of telling me directly that they were abandoning me with the bill for this entire trip. "Signora?" Lucia looked concerned. "Is everything all right?" No, everything was not all right. Everything was very, very not all right. "The room charges," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "All of them are now on my account?" Lucia nodded sympathetically. "I am sorry, but yes. When they checked out, the reservation automatically transferred all charges to the remaining guest. This is standard hotel policy." Standard hotel policy. Of course it was. I walked back to my room in a daze, sat on the edge of the bed, and called Kimberly's phone. Straight to voicemail. Ryan's phone. Same thing. I tried texting. "What the hell just happened? Why didn't you tell me you were leaving?" The messages showed as delivered, but not read. Finally, I called Mom. "Gracie, how's Rome? Are you having a wonderful time?" "Mom," I interrupted. "Kimberly and Ryan left. They changed their flights and checked out without telling me." A pause. Then, "Oh, sweetheart, didn't they tell you? Ryan mentioned there was some kind of work emergency he had to get back for." "A work emergency?" "Right. because Ryan's part-time job at a marketing startup was definitely the kind of place that demanded immediate international flight changes. And they left me with the hotel bill for all 3 rooms. Another pause, longer this time. Well, honey, you know they're both struggling financially right now. And you've always been so generous with family things. I'm sure they'll pay you back when they can. When they can. Not as soon as possible or immediately. When they can. As if nearly $30,000 was just a casual loan between siblings. Mom, I'm sitting here with a hotel bill for $15,000 that I never agreed to pay. Don't be dramatic. Gracie, you have the money, and family helps family. Besides, this was your idea to take everyone on vacation. My idea. My idea to take everyone on vacation. I hung up before I said something I might regret. But as I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of what was supposed to be a family bonding experience, something inside me shifted. They wanted to play games? Fine. I could play games too. I spent the rest of that day in Rome doing something I'd never done before, documenting everything. Every receipt, every credit card charge, every text message where they'd promised to pay me back later or mentioned their temporary banking issues. I photographed it all, organized it chronologically, and created a detailed spreadsheet that would have made an accountant proud. The total damage, $31,847. $31,847. That's what this family bonding experience had cost me, not including the original $8,000 for flights that I'd actually agreed to pay. I also did something else that day. I enjoyed Rome on my own terms. I had a leisurely breakfast at a cafe near the Pantheon, visited the Trevi Fountain without anyone rushing me to get the perfect Instagram shot, and had dinner at a small family-owned restaurant where the owner's grandmother made pasta by hand. It was the best day of the entire trip. That evening, I called the hotel's front desk and paid the bill in full. Not because I thought I owed it, but because I wanted a clean legal record of exactly what I'd paid and why. The receipt was damning in its simplicity. 3 rooms, multiple nights, all charges transferred to my name when the other guests checked out early. On the flight home the next day, I had 8 hours to think. 8 hours to decide whether I was going to absorb this loss quietly, the way I'd absorbed every other financial slight from my family over the years, or whether I was going to do something different. By the time we landed, my decision was made. I drove straight home from the airport, bypassed the usual post-travel routine of unpacking and catching up on mail, and instead sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and all the documentation I'd organized in Rome. First, I sent a single text message to both Kimberly and Ryan. I've calculated the total expenses you left me with. $31,847. I have all receipts and documentation. Please let me know by this weekend how you plan to reimburse me. Both messages were read immediately. Neither was answered. Then I called my parents. Gracie, you're back. How was the rest of Rome? Mom, I need you and Dad to understand something very clearly. Kimberly and Ryan left me with over $30,000 in expenses that were supposed to be their responsibility. I have everything documented, and I expect full reimbursement. Honey, you're upset. Why don't you give it a few days to settle down and then we can all talk about this like adults? I am talking about this like an adult. I'm talking about this like an adult who just discovered her family planned an elaborate con to steal $30,000 from her. Steal is a very strong word, Gracie. So is theft, Mom. And that's what this was. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that I thought she might have hung up. Your father and I think you're overreacting. This is what families do. They help each other. You know Kimberly and Ryan don't have your kind of money. Then they shouldn't have planned a $30,000 vacation. We raised you to be generous and caring. I don't know what's happened to you, but this isn't the daughter we know. And there it was. The same manipulation they'd been using my entire life. The suggestion that being upset about being stolen from made me somehow defective as a person. But this time, it didn't work. You're right, Mom. This isn't the daughter you know. The daughter you know would have quietly paid for everything and never mentioned it again. But that daughter is done being your family's ATM. I hung up before she could respond. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. I called a lawyer. What do you think will happen next? Have you ever had to take legal action against family members? Let me know in the comments. And make sure to subscribe. You won't want to miss how this all played out. The lawyer's name was Patricia Chen, and she had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that made me feel like I was finally talking to someone who lived in reality instead of whatever fantasy land my family had been operating in. $31,000, she repeated, reviewing my documentation. And you have all receipts, credit card statements, and written promises to reimburse? Everything, I confirmed, including text messages where they specifically acknowledged they would pay me back. Patricia nodded approvingly. This is actually quite straightforward. They made verbal and written agreements to cover certain expenses, failed to honor those agreements, and left you financially responsible for their obligations. We can pursue this through small claims court for the amount under the limit and civil court for the remainder. While we discussed legal options, I made the mistake of checking social media. There, posted 3 hours earlier on my mother's Facebook page, was a photo that made my blood boil. Mom and Dad sitting on their back patio with cocktails, huge smiles on their faces. The caption read, "Finalmente un pouco de paz." Finally, a little peace. Posted while I was sitting in a lawyer's office trying to recover the money their other children had stolen from me. The comment section was full of family friends saying things like, "You deserve it," and "enjoy the quiet time," like I was some kind of burden that had finally been lifted from their lives. Patricia noticed my expression. "Bad news?" "Just my parents celebrating the fact that their scam worked," I said, showing her the post. "Posted while I'm here trying to get my money back." "Social media evidence can actually be quite useful," she said matter-of-factly. "Screenshots everything. The timing of that post could be relevant if this goes to court." I spent the rest of that week filing paperwork, gathering evidence, and doing something I'd never done before, prioritizing my own interests over my family's comfort. The legal notice was served to both Kimberly and Ryan on a Wednesday morning. I know this because Kimberly called me at 7:23 a.m., her voice shaking with rage. "What the hell, Gracie?" "Legal papers? Seriously? Good morning to you too, Kim." "Don't good morning me. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? The process server came to my office." "Ah, yes. Because the real tragedy here was her mild professional embarrassment, not the fact that she'd stolen $30,000 from her sister." "You have two options," I said calmly. "Pay what you owe or deal with the legal process. Your choice." "This is insane. We're family." "Family doesn't abandon each other with hotel bills they can't afford, Kim." She hung up on me. Ryan's call came 20 minutes later. "Gracie, come on, this is getting out of hand." "Actually, Ryan, I think stealing money and then refusing to pay it back is what got out of hand. The legal action is just me trying to get back to hand. You know we don't have that kind of money right now. Then you shouldn't have spent that kind of money." The logic was so simple, yet somehow completely foreign to both of them. What do you think will happen next? Have you ever had family members react badly when you finally stood up for yourself? Let me know in the comments below. Over the next few days, I received a series of increasingly desperate messages from both siblings, ranging from angry accusations to bargaining attempts to outright pleading. But here's the thing about setting boundaries for the first time in your life. It's terrifying and liberating at exactly the same time. For 28 years, I had been trained to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own basic rights, to absorb their poor decisions without complaint, to be the family ATM that never required a PIN. But sitting in that lawyer's office, looking at the documentation of their betrayal, something had fundamentally shifted in me. I was done. The real meltdown came when the second wave of legal papers arrived, the ones that meant business was about to get very real, very quickly. Kimberly showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her usual carefully curated appearance had been replaced by sweatpants and the kind of frazzled energy that comes from realizing actions have consequences. "We need to talk," she announced, pushing past me into my living room. "Good morning, Kim. Please come in," I said to her back. Sarcasm is my love language, apparently. She spun around, her face flushed with anger and something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand what this means for us?" "I understand that it means you might actually have to pay for something you bought." Revolutionary concept, I know. "This isn't a joke, Gracie. This is serious." "You're absolutely right. $31,000 is very serious." She started pacing, her hands gesturing wildly as she launched into what I can only describe as an epic tantrum disguised as righteous indignation. "You're destroying this family over money. Money, Gracie. You're willing to tear apart everything we have because of some receipts and credit card bills." "I'm not destroying anything, Kim. I'm just not covering up your destruction anymore." "That's not what this is. This was supposed to be a family trip. We were supposed to be bonding and making memories." "Oh, we definitely made memories. I'll never forget the memory of waking up alone in Rome with a $15,000 hotel bill." She stopped pacing and stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Since when are you so cold? This isn't you, Gracie. The real you would understand that sometimes families have to help each other out. The real me. As if there was some authentic version of myself that existed solely to be financially exploited by my relatives. You're right. The real me would have quietly paid for everything and never mentioned it again. The real me would have apologized to you for putting you in the awkward position of having to accept my generosity. The real me would probably be writing you a check right now to make this whole unpleasant situation go away. Hope flickered in her eyes. But here's the thing, Kim. The real me was an idiot. The real me was a doormat who confused being used with being loved. So I decided to try being the fake me for a while, and you know what? The fake me has much better boundaries. Her hope died as quickly as it had appeared. You can't be serious about this legal stuff. You can't actually want to drag your own family through court proceedings and collection agencies and all that humiliating bureaucratic nonsense. Watch me. Fine, she exploded. You want to play hardball? We can play hardball too. Ryan and I have been talking, and we think you're being completely unreasonable about this whole situation. Mom and Dad agree. You're the one making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Ah, there it was. The family meeting I hadn't been invited to, where they'd all decided I was the problem. Let me guess, I said. You all got together and discussed how unreasonable I'm being, and how this is just typical Gracie being dramatic, and how I've always been too focused on money. Her face told me I'd hit the target dead center. You know what the funny thing is? Kim, you're all so used to me absorbing your problems that you genuinely can't understand why I won't absorb this one too. It's like you think there's some natural law that says Gracie pays and everyone else benefits. That's not... We don't... You do, though. And the craziest part is that you've convinced yourselves you're the victims here. Poor Kim and Ryan, betrayed by their unreasonable sister who expects them to honor their agreements. I walked to the door and opened it. This conversation is over. You can pay what you owe, or you can deal with the legal process. But you can't do what you've always done, which is make your problems into my problems. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her struggling with the reality that I wasn't going to fold. This isn't over, Gracie. Actually, Kim, it is. It's been over since the moment you left me alone in that hotel. Everything that's happening now is just cleanup. After she left, I sat on my couch and realized I felt lighter than I had in years. The first real consequence hit Ryan 2 weeks later, and I know this because he called me at work, practically hyperventilating. Gracie, they garnished my wages. My paycheck was short $800. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied, not sorry at all. You don't understand, I had bills due. My rent check bounced. My credit card payment was declined. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is to have to explain to my boss why there's a wage garnishment on my account? Actually, I did have an idea. It was probably about as embarrassing as having to explain to a hotel concierge why your siblings abandoned you with a massive bill. But I didn't mention that. Ryan, you can stop this anytime by paying what you owe. I can't pay $30,000. I don't have $30,000. Then maybe you shouldn't have spent $30,000. The logic was apparently still too complex for him to grasp. This is crazy. Gracie, you're destroying my financial stability over a vacation. No, Ryan, you destroyed your financial stability when you decided to commit fraud. I'm just the person who refused to cover for you. Over the next few days, both siblings experienced what I like to think of as reality therapy. Kimberly's bank account was frozen for 3 days while the court sorted out asset protection orders. During those 3 days, her automatic payments failed, her credit card was declined at a restaurant, and she had to call Mom for money to buy groceries. The same mom who had told me I was being dramatic about money. Suddenly, when it was their comfortable daughter dealing with financial consequences instead of their reliable daughter absorbing financial abuse, money became very serious indeed. The phone calls from my parents started immediately. Gracie, this has gone too far, Dad said during what I assumed was a carefully planned intervention call. Your mother and I think you need to stop this legal nonsense and work things out like a family. I tried to work things out like a family. Dad, I spent a year planning a vacation, paid for flights, and got abandoned with a $30,000 bill. That's how our family works things out. You're being vindictive. I'm being consistent. For the first time in my life, I'm applying the same standards to family members that I'd apply to anyone else who stole from me. Stole is a strong word. So is embezzlement. Dad, so is fraud. So is theft. Would you prefer one of those? The conversation devolved quickly into the greatest hits of family manipulation. I was being selfish. I was tearing the family apart. I had always been too focused on money. They had raised me better than this. But here's what I realized during that call. Their arguments only worked if I accepted the premise that I owed them something more than they owed me, that my money was somehow more available to them than their money was to me, that my comfort mattered less than theirs. Once I rejected that premise, their entire worldview collapsed. Dad, I interrupted during his speech about family loyalty, let me ask you something. If Kim and Ryan had done this exact same thing to you, planned an expensive vacation, promised to pay their share, then abandoned you with the full bill, what would you do? Long pause. That's different. How? Because Because you have more money than we do. And there it was. The truth, finally spoken out loud. I had more money, therefore I had fewer rights. I had been successful, therefore I deserved to be punished for that success by being treated as a family resource rather than a family member. Thanks for clarifying that, Dad. Now I know exactly where I stand. The pattern continued for the next few weeks. Legal consequences would hit one of them. They'd panic and call me begging for mercy. I'd decline to rescue them. They'd call our parents. And our parents would call me to explain why I was being unreasonable. It was like watching a machine break down. The same machine that had been smoothly extracting money from me for years was suddenly grinding and sparking because one component had stopped working. That component was me. The family intervention happened on a Tuesday evening in October. I know it was Tuesday, because that's when I normally have my standing dinner plans with myself and whatever true crime podcast is keeping me company these days. Instead, I got a call from Mom. Gracie, we need to talk. As a family. Tonight. I'm not really in the mood for another lecture about how I'm destroying everyone's lives by expecting them to pay their debts. This isn't a lecture. This is a conversation. We're all going to sit down and figure out how to fix this situation. I almost laughed. Now they wanted to sit down and figure things out. After weeks of legal proceedings, after wage garnishments and frozen accounts, after I'd been called vindictive and selfish and dramatic, now they were ready for a reasonable conversation. Where? I asked. Our house. 7 o'clock. I considered not going. I considered a lot of things, but ultimately, I was curious to see what their endgame was. What possible solution they could offer that would make this all go away, while allowing them to keep my money. I arrived to find the whole family gathered in the living room like some kind of dysfunctional board meeting. Mom and Dad on the couch, Kimberly and Ryan in the armchairs, and one empty spot clearly designated for me, the defendant's chair. Thank you for coming, Mom said formally, like we were opening a diplomatic summit. Wouldn't miss it, I replied, settling into my assigned seat. I love family meetings where I'm the only one who didn't know we were having a family meeting. Dad cleared his throat. Gracie, we've all been talking, and we think there might be a way to resolve this situation that works for everyone. I'm listening. Kimberly leaned forward, her expression earnest and practiced. We want to pay you back. We really do. But the legal stuff is making it impossible for us to get back on our feet financially so we can actually make payments. So what you're saying is, you can't pay me back because facing consequences for not paying me back is too expensive? That's not, Ryan started. That's exactly what she's saying, I interrupted. The garnishments and account freezes are costing you money, so you can't afford to pay me the money you owe me. It's like a financial catch-22, except the catch is that you spent money you didn't have and don't want to face the consequences. Mom jumped in with her most reasonable voice. What if we worked out a payment plan? Something manageable for them but fair to you? I'm open to hearing proposals. Kimberly pulled out a sheet of paper covered in what looked like very optimistic math. We were thinking we could pay you back $50 a month each. So that's $100 a month total, and in, she paused to calculate, about 26 years, you'd have your money back. I stared at her. 26 years. To pay back money for a vacation they'd taken last month. Plus interest? Of course, Ryan added quickly, like that made the offer reasonable. What kind of interest rate are we talking about? I asked. We were thinking maybe 2%, since we're family and all. 2% annual interest on a 26-year loan for money they'd essentially stolen. Even loan sharks had more generous terms. Counter offer, I said calmly. You pay me back in full within 6 months or the legal proceedings continue exactly as they are. That's impossible, Kimberly protested. We don't have that kind of money. Then you shouldn't have spent that kind of money. But we thought… You thought what? Kim? You thought I'd just absorb the loss and never mention it again? You thought you could steal $30,000 from me and face no consequences as long as you acted surprised and offended when I asked for it back? The room went silent. Dad tried a different approach. Gracie, I understand you're hurt, but this is tearing our family apart. Is that really what you want? Dad, let me ask you something. When Kim and Ryan planned this trip, did they consult you about the costs? Well, no, but when they made reservations at 5-star hotels and Michelin-starred restaurants, did they ask if you thought those expenses were reasonable? I don't see how that's… When they decided to abandon me in Rome with a $15,000 hotel bill, did they call you for advice? He shifted uncomfortably. No. So they made all these financial decisions without any input from you. But now that there are consequences for those decisions, suddenly it's a family problem that requires a family solution? You're twisting everything, Mom said. We're just trying to find a way forward. The way forward is very simple. They pay what they owe. If they can't pay it all at once, they work with my lawyer to establish a reasonable payment plan with appropriate interest rates and collateral. If they don't want to do that, they can continue dealing with wage garnishments and asset seizures until the debt is satisfied. That's not what families do to each other, Ryan said quietly. You're absolutely right, Ryan. Families don't abandon each other with massive debts. Families don't lie about banking problems to avoid paying their share. Families don't plan elaborate cons to steal each other's money. So I guess we're not acting like a family anymore, are we? I stood up. The legal process continues. If you want to make payment arrangements, contact my lawyer. As I reached the door, Mom called after me. Gracie, if you walk out that door, don't expect things to go back to normal between us. I turned back to face them all. These people who had raised me to believe that being exploited was the same as being loved. Mom, things were never normal between us. Normal families don't have one member who pays for everything while everyone else takes credit for their generosity. Normal families don't guilt-trip someone for expecting basic honesty about money. Normal families don't stage interventions to convince someone they should be grateful to be stolen from. So what are you saying? Dad asked. I'm saying that if this is what passes for normal in our family, then I don't want normal anymore. And for the first time in my life, I walked out of a family meeting without apologizing for anything. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time in my adult life, my phone wasn't constantly buzzing with requests for money, complaints about their financial struggles, or guilt trips about how I wasn't doing enough to help. The quiet was initially unsettling. I'd been conditioned to expect crisis management as a regular part of my weekly routine, but as days turned into weeks, I discovered something remarkable: peace. My bank account stopped hemorrhaging money toward various family emergencies. My weekends were no longer spent researching solutions to problems I hadn't created. My mental energy was suddenly available for my own projects and interests. It was like recovering from an illness I hadn't realized I was suffering from. The few family interactions that did occur were stilted and awkward. When I ran into Kimberly at the grocery store, she acted like she'd spotted a former friend who had betrayed some sacred trust. Polite but cold, with an undercurrent of wounded righteousness that was almost impressive in its complete lack of self-awareness. How are things going? I asked casually, genuinely curious about how she was managing her finances with the garnishment in place. Fine, she replied curtly. We're managing. Managing. Code for learning to live within our actual means for the first time in our adult lives. Ryan was more direct in his avoidance. I heard through extended family that he'd switched gyms, changed grocery stores, and even started using a different coffee shop, all to avoid the possibility of running into me and having an uncomfortable conversation about the money he owed. The effort he was putting into avoiding me was more than he'd ever put into paying me back. But the most telling change was in how the family operated without me as their financial safety net. Mom mentioned during one of our increasingly rare phone calls that they'd had to cancel their annual family vacation because money was tight this year. Money was tight, as if it was some mysterious economic downturn rather than the predictable result of two family members learning to live with the consequences of their own choices. That's too bad, I replied neutrally. We were hoping things would be resolved by now, she added meaningfully. They are resolved. Kim and Ryan owe me money and they're paying it back through legal channels. Very resolved. You know that's not what I mean. I did know what she meant. She meant she was hoping I would have folded by now. That the pressure of family disapproval and the awkwardness of legal proceedings would have convinced me to write off the debt and return to my role as the family ATM. But something funny had happened during those months of silence and legal proceedings. I had remembered who I was when I wasn't constantly managing other people's crises. I was someone who enjoyed my work, who had hobbies and interests beyond family drama, who could make plans without wondering which relative would need me to cancel them. I was someone who went to bed without mentally calculating how much money I'd spent on other people that day. I was someone I actually liked spending time with. The legal process ground on with bureaucratic efficiency. Payments were extracted from Ryan's salary with mechanical regularity. Kimberly's attempts to hide assets had been unsuccessful, and her account remained monitored for any new deposits that could be seized. Neither of them had contacted me directly in months. But the most significant change wasn't in their behavior, it was in mine. I had spent so many years reflexively saying yes to any family request that I'd forgotten I had the option to say no. Now, every decision went through a simple filter. Is this good for me? It was a revolutionary concept. When my cousin called asking if I could loan her $2,000 for car repairs, I said no without elaborate explanations or guilt. When my aunt suggested I contribute to a family gift for someone's wedding, I declined politely and bought my own gift. When my parents mentioned that they were struggling with home repairs and could use some financial help, I expressed sympathy and changed the subject. Each boundary I set made the next one easier. Each no reminded me that I wasn't responsible for solving every problem that occurred within a 50-mile radius of my zip code. The family's response to this new version of me was interesting to observe. They cycled through the classic stages of grief: denial that I would really maintain these boundaries, anger that I wasn't responding to their usual manipulation techniques, bargaining with increasingly creative guilt trips, and finally a kind of sullen acceptance that their reliable source of emergency funding had permanently dried up. But something else happened during this process. Something I hadn't expected. I started getting calls from extended family members, cousins, aunts, uncles, who had heard bits and pieces of the story and wanted to check in. I always wondered how you managed to be so generous all the time, my cousin Sarah mentioned during one conversation. Now I'm wondering if you were being generous or if you were being taken advantage of. It turned out I wasn't the only family member who had noticed the pattern of financial requests always flowing in one direction. Others had observed the dynamics but assumed I was happy with the arrangement since I never complained. You always seemed so put together, my Aunt Linda said. We figured you had money to spare and didn't mind helping out. The conversation was enlightening. My silence about the financial imbalance had been interpreted as consent. My lack of complaints had been seen as evidence that I was comfortable being the family bank. By keeping the peace, I had enabled the very situation that was destroying my peace. 18 months after that disastrous family meeting, I received a call from Patricia Chen. The final payment came through this morning, she said. With interest and legal fees, the total recovered was $37,412. $37,000. More than I'd ever expected to see again. But as I hung up the phone, I realized the money wasn't the real victory. The real victory was the person I'd become in the process of fighting for it. The old Gracie would have absorbed the loss, rationalized the betrayal, and probably planned the next family vacation within 6 months. She would have told herself that family harmony was more important than financial fairness, that keeping the peace was worth any price. The new Gracie understood that there's no harmony in inequality, and no peace in exploitation. I celebrated that evening with takeout from my favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of wine I'd been saving. Not because the money mattered that much, but because I had finally learned the difference between being generous and being a victim. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Kimberly. I wanted you to know that we finished paying back the money. I hope you're happy. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, I am happy. I hope you learned something from this experience. Her response came quickly. I learned that money is more important to you than family. I almost laughed. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't see it. I learned that I'm more important to me than your comfort, I replied. And that's exactly as it should be. She didn't respond. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I planned a vacation for myself. Just myself. A week in Costa Rica, staying at a beautiful eco-lodge I'd always wanted to visit. No one else's preferences to consider, no one else's budget to accommodate, no one else's drama to manage. Just me, making choices based on what I wanted. While researching activities for the trip, I thought about the conversation with Kimberly. She was right about one thing. Money had become more important to me than family, but not in the way she meant. Money had become a symbol of respect, of boundaries, of the basic acknowledgement that I was a person with rights rather than a resource to be exploited. When they treated my money as theirs, they were treating me as less than equal. And I had finally decided I was worth more than that. The Costa Rica trip was everything I'd hoped for. I hiked through cloud forests, lounged on beaches, and had conversations with fellow travelers who didn't know my family history and didn't need anything from me except pleasant company. On my last day there, I sat on a balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean and realized something profound. I wasn't angry anymore. For months, I had carried the burning resentment of betrayal, the exhausting weight of righteous indignation, but sitting there, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, I felt only gratitude. Gratitude that I had finally learned to value myself appropriately. Gratitude that I no longer confused being used with being loved. Gratitude that I had discovered the difference between family and people who happen to share your DNA. When I returned home, there was a message on my answering machine from Ryan. Hey, Gracie, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not just about the money, but about how we treated you. I've been thinking about it a lot, and I realize now that we took advantage of your generosity for years. I don't know if you'll ever want to have a relationship with us again, but I wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did. It was the first genuine apology I'd ever received from any of them. I saved the message but didn't call him back. Some bridges, once burned, are meant to stay that way. Not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. My parents made one final attempt at reconciliation about a year later, when Mom called to invite me to Dad's 60th birthday party. The whole family will be there, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Including Kim and Ryan? Yes, then I won't be, I replied simply. Gracie, how long are you going to punish us for this? I'm not punishing anyone, Mom. I'm just making choices based on what's best for me. And spending time with people who think it's acceptable to steal from me isn't what's best for me. They paid you back. They paid me back because they were forced to by legal proceedings. That's not the same as choosing to do the right thing. The conversation ended the way most of our conversations ended now, with disappointed silence on her end and peaceful resolve on mine. I sent Dad a birthday card and a nice gift, but I didn't attend the party. Instead, I spent that weekend hiking with friends I'd made through a photography club I'd joined. People who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could provide. As I write this, it's been 3 years since the Rome incident. 3 years since I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's survival. 3 years since I discovered that the family who raised me to be generous had actually raised me to be exploitable. Do I miss them? Sometimes. I miss the idea of them, the fantasy of what a loving family might look like. But I don't miss the reality of being their designated financial sacrifice. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the family member who always gives but never receives, if you've ever wondered whether standing up for yourself is worth the cost, let me tell you something. You are worth more than other people's comfort. Your boundaries matter, your money matters, your peace of mind matters. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for people who take advantage of you is to stop letting them do it. Make sure to like and subscribe if this story helped you think about your own family dynamics. You deserve relationships built on respect, not exploitation. Trust me on this one.